these charges. He said that they now have a plan in place, and so they're ready to move forward and do that. We also heard from the district attorney here in Blair County saying that the cases here in Pennsylvania do still remain active, but that for now they are going to wait to see how the court case plays out in New York, and that when the defendant is available, they will move forward with trying him on the charges here in Pennsylvania. But the attention really turning to New York. There were nearly a dozen NYPD officers in court today preparing to take him into custody, along with about 3 Pennsylvania officers. And also, even as Mangione is no longer here, there are a couple of supporters of his that remain outside. There were more than half a dozen here earlier. They slowly started to dwindle, but it did have that atmosphere, a bit of that circus-like atmosphere where you had people dressed up as the video game character Luigi. You had a number of people holding signs saying that healthcare privatization is a crime, and saying that that is terrorism. And so the things that we've been seeing online with people being really critical of the healthcare industry and health insurance industry and appearing to sympathize with Mangione, also now manifesting in person here outside of the courthouse in Pennsylvania. Jose?
And Rahima, meanwhile, let's go to New York City, where the suspect is being flown to as we speak. What can we expect from what's going to happen in New York City?
Well, Jose, as you point out, about 20 minutes ago, he left the Pennsylvania area in flight here to New York. It's about a 90-minute flight, plus or minus some time. So it'll be shortly that he'll be back here. But we got some news not so long ago that we expect that the federal authorities are going to take him into federal court first, where he will be facing charges there. That will be his initial appearance. And we were told that any state court appearance that would happen here at the Manhattan District Court, that would come at a different time or at a different date. We do not know anything particular about that. But the feds are going to have an appearance for him in court, federal court, just around the corner from where I'm standing right now. That federal charge, if he is found guilty of a federal charge of murder, that could carry a death penalty. Now, the 11 counts against him, as far as New York State is concerned, they have 2 counts of murder in that. And if he's found guilty of those charges, he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. That would be for a 26-year-old man who's accused back on December 4th of shooting to death the CEO, Brian Thompson. And now he's coming back here after having been found last week in Pennsylvania, where they say he was carrying a 3-page handwritten letter that was critical of corporate America, and he had a ghost gun that was, they say, ballistics match. It matched the ballistics of the one that was used to kill Brian Thompson. So everyone is waiting here for exactly what's going to happen. We think it'll be within an hour and a half, perhaps 2 hours, before we see some activity in the federal court around the corner. And we don't know yet when we'll see any activity in the state court here where I'm standing now. Jose?
I want to bring in MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin, who's at the Manhattan Criminal Court. So, Lisa, there is the federal court, there is the state court. How is it going to be carried out today?
Well, Jose, our understanding as of this morning was that Luigi Mangione, once extradited from Pennsylvania, would show up at the courthouse right behind us, 100 Center Street. That's the Manhattan Criminal Court, where he would face arraignment on the 11 charges brought by the Manhattan District Attorney. But as you were just discussing with Rahima, we now understand that it's possible that the federal government, acting through the Department of Justice and specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, will bring charges first. The question is, how are those charges going to differ? In the ordinary course, murder charges or possession of weapons, those are state crimes, but there can be certain aggravating factors that allow the federal government to bring those charges instead. One of the things that might differentiate a federal charge, for example, from a state charge is the interstate movement of Luigi Mangione to target Brian Thompson, the United Health CEO, who he allegedly murdered. So if you are, for example, not only carrying out a murder in a premeditated way, but you are purposefully trying to track somebody's movements from state to state and following them, essentially, in order to commit that crime, that's where you've got the possible involvement of the federal government. There are also certain federal charges having to do with guns that are different in nature and kind than the kinds of charges that can be brought in state court. Those are the 2 kinds of charges that I'm looking for to see if they manifest in any federal indictment, as we're expecting today, Jose.
Yeah, and Charles, I mean, this of all the different counts, 11 in the state court, in New York, in the state one, there is including a first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism. What is that count, and what are the difficulties that prosecutors have in getting that count to stick?
Sure, Jose. One of the biggest things about this case that's interesting when you're watching is the notion of establishing intent. And when you're talking about this particular charge, the first-degree murder charge with respect to terrorism is a purely almost intent charge in terms of what the government is going to need to establish and prove to solidify the idea that Mangione committed this murder for the purposes of essentially stoking a larger fear, not just with Brian Thompson. And in this case, the argument is going to be that he committed this crime for the purposes of essentially scaring the healthcare industry into doing what it was that they are not doing now. That is the motive that prosecutors are going to have to make out if they want to establish this first-degree murder with the terrorism piece to it. That is going to be helped by the manifesto that they found in his bag, but it is still going to be a very high burden that the prosecution is going to have at trial, because you're not just talking about one individual, you're talking about the effect that it's going to have, or that they are going to imply that he wanted to have on an entire industry. And that's very, very difficult to prove.
And we are now getting word that indeed the Justice Department, through the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, is expected to file federal charges this afternoon against Mangione. And there, Misty, there is the issue of death penalty.
Correct. So this is likely to manifest as a stalking murder. We know that Luigi Mangione, according to what's reported, traveled to New York specifically to target Brian Thompson. And so because he crossed state lines, because we have the manifesto, there was also another notebook, which was a planning document that investigators are looking at. All of that is going to be pieced together to establish that he traveled to New York interstate for the purposes of killing Brian Thompson. And that's what makes it federal.
I was just thinking, that is what makes it federal. And then what is it that makes it death penalty versus in contrast to the state charge?
So if the state charge in New York, the death penalty hasn't been a part of New York law for many, many years. But under federal law, the death penalty is applicable. Like any other death penalty statute, there have to be aggravating factors with respect to the case in order for the death penalty to be on the table. The feds are going to have to make that determination whether they'll seek the death penalty. In a case like this, it's certainly something that could be applicable. And keep in mind, Jose, you know, you have a case here now, these really high-level charges, now the death penalty potentially on the table. Is this something to possibly leverage a plea deal?
Right.
Take the death penalty off the table, plead guilty, life without parole. In New York, plead guilty, maybe 25 years to life, you know, have the opportunity to parole a 26-year-old guy.
It's very important to understand that even without the death penalty, what we're looking at here, more likely than not, especially with respect to the federal charges, is life in prison if Mr. Mangione is convicted of first-degree murder. It doesn't necessarily have to rise to the point of capital punishment, but even without that, it's very, very probable that prosecutors will seek to have him get life. And if they do invoke the idea of a plea deal, it's going to likely be life in prison.
And so, Lisa, there is communication and agreement between state and federal in a case like this?
Not necessarily, Jose, and oftentimes there's a lot of jockeying behind the scenes as to which office will bring charges first or which will bring charges at all. Oftentimes you see one office standing down in lieu of the other, and that's a particularly complicated history when you're talking about the two prosecutorial offices at issue here, one being the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, the other being the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. As you were discussing with Misty and Charles, federal charges often carry greater severity of punishment due to those aggravating factors. The interstate travel, sometimes the federal law punishes the possession of gun paraphernalia used to accomplish crimes in different ways than states do. Here, I'm not sure that we see an agreement yet. In fact, we're getting conflicting information this morning about which office is prepared to go first in charging Luigi Mangione. It's not clear to us where Luigi Mangione will be arraigned first, whether he'll be arraigned here in the court behind me at 100 Center Street in Manhattan or just around the corner at 500 Pearl Street. We, NBC News, continue to work on getting reportable and reliable information. And as soon as we have that, Jose, we'll come to you with where that lands.
Misty, this guy seems, in many ways privileged. I mean, he's got a team of lawyers in Pennsylvania. He's got this high-powered attorney team in New York City. What do you see as the possible defense for the New York team with this specific amount of information and, video cross-referencing?
Right. What the defense team is going to try and do is get some of that evidence precluded. Yes. They're going to look at how that evidence was actually collected. So, he's apprehended at a McDonald's, right? And so he's asked to take his mask down. That's where a lot of the literal smoking gun, right? He has the ghost gun in his possession. He has the manifesto. He has the false ID, which he had used in New York. If you can get some of that precluded because there was no warrant to search the backpack wasn't searched according to in violation of his constitutional rights, the case changes dramatically. And there can be what's called fruits of the poisonous tree, meaning any other evidence that was collected and as a result of what was found could also be precluded. The defense team is going to make that argument. Whether it's successful, we can't tell as of now because we don't have that information.
Jose, one of the things to consider with a case like this is that you're talking about multiple jurisdictions and multiple agencies from law enforcement that have had their hands in this case. Every time someone else touches this investigation, creates the potential for, as Misty was talking about, something to go awry with respect to the chain of custody, with respect to how he was apprehended, with respect to anything that was recovered as part of the investigation. And so you're going to, as a defense attorney, be looking at every I and every T to make sure they were dotted and crossed. And if anything's amiss, you're trying to get it thrown out.
Lisa Rubin, Priscilla Thompson, Raheem Ellis, Charles Coleman, and Misty Maris, thank you all so very much. We'll, of course, continue to bring you updates on this developing story. But first, the other breaking news this morning, the U.S. government appears to be barreling towards a shutdown after President-elect Trump effectively killed the bill that was meant to stop a shutdown. So what's next? We'll ask Congressman Brendan Boyle, ranking member of the House Budget Committee. Also breaking this morning, an appeals court disqualifies DA Fani Willis from overseeing Georgia's election interference case against Donald Trump. We're back in 90 seconds. You're watching Jose Díaz-Balart Reports on MSNBC.
I recently heard of a way to make mealtime throughout the week so much easier. Cook Unity is a direct-to-chef marketplace connecting you to your city's top chefs. Choose from hundreds of weekly menu items: vegetarian, vegan, keto, paleo. Pick your plan, select your meals, and they're delivered right to your door. All you do is heat and eat. Cook Unity. Real food from real chefs, delivered fresh. Visit cookunity.com/TV for 50% off your first week.
Wait, Noom has GLP-1 meds now?
No way.
Noom, the psychology-based weight loss company?
Yes, Noom combines medication with healthy habits so you can lose the weight and keep it off.
And they guarantee it.
That's really smart.
That's Noom Smart. It starts at just $149, and it ships to your door in 7 days.
It's better than the perfect dink.
Who's ready to get pickled?
Noom, the smart way to lose weight.
Ow.
So you think Santa will like these red and green M&Ms?
I don't know. I never met the guy. He does exist.
They do exist.
Santa?
MSNBC Premium gives you early access and ad-free listening to Rachel Maddow's chart-topping series, MSNBC Original Podcasts, exclusive bonus content, and all of your favorite MSNBC shows now ad-free. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
16 past the hour, we are following breaking news from Capitol Hill, where Congress has just over 36 hours to come up with a plan to avert a government shutdown. With us this morning, NBC's Ryan Nobles and Garrick Hake. And Ryan, this time yesterday, it looked like we'd probably